What's up, everybody? Jeff here, and we are back to talk about some more Through the Breach. Through the Breach is the Malifaux RPG, and there's all sorts of other videos about it on my channel, including a couple of weeks ago where I did a video about how you actually level up your characters in Through the Breach. The system is very unique and is a little bit different than what you might be used to from other RPG systems, so I thought it might be interesting to talk about one of the coolest and most unique parts of Through the Breach, which is the Fate system. Malifaux, as well as Through the Breach, have a sort of card-based tarot theme going with them, obviously, if you've played any of the games. So when you're building your character in Through the Breach, you're going to notice that every time you flip a card to do part of the character creation process, there's going to be this little sentence that comes with it, or a fragment of a sentence, that becomes your character's fate. After you flip all 5 cards, you're going to actually go through them in reverse order and assemble those into 2 sentences that are going to be the fate of your character. And that actually impacts the mechanics as well as the character progression and some of the character advancement that you're going to unlock as you play. It can be a little confusing for a first timer, and like I said before, it's not really something that you see in other systems, at least as far as I'm aware. But I think it's one of the coolest parts of the game, and I think it's important that you don't miss it. Now, I'm going to cover the character creation process in more detail in a future video, but what I just said is pretty much everything you need to know for the purposes of understanding how the fate steps and your character's fates are going to work. They're just going to be generated based on the cards that you're flipping during character creation. You're going to copy that sentence down for your character and just keep that on hand as you play. But it's also important that the Fate Master knows what all of their characters' fates are, because each of those 5 sentence fragments that are part of your fate are going to at some point be the feature or the focus of a particular session of the game. And each time you play through one of those sessions, that character is going to encounter some sort of choice, and they're either going to have the opportunity to embrace their fate or to reject their fate, and that is going to allow them to unlock a fate step, which is kind of like a super level up. Before we get into it any further, though, let me explain something that I think is a little bit counterintuitive for a lot of people, myself included, and that is what the game means by a session. A lot of people think of a session in the colloquial sense as like you and your friends get together for RPG night, you play for 3 or 4 hours, and then you go home. That's a session. That's not really what we mean by a session when we're talking about that in Through the Breach. In Through the Breach, a session is a sort of self-contained part of the story. It's sort of like a chapter, you might think of, in a more traditional RPG campaign. It's something the Fate Master is supposed to roughly plan out ahead of time. And if you're not familiar, Through the Breach is supposed to be played in a little bit more of a sort of self-contained fragmentary form than a more traditional D&D campaign that you might think of. Now, you don't have to play it like that, and I've definitely played it in a more traditional way in the past, but the way that the game is actually laid out is in sessions. It starts with a prologue where you sort of set the scene and give the characters an idea of what's going to be going on. There's no card flipping during the prologue. And then you play through the scenes in whatever order, and once you get to the resolution of whatever the dilemma is or whatever the mission is that your characters are on at that time, that's going to be the end of the session, and at that point, all your characters are going to level up, and someone's going to achieve a fate step. So in practice, a session might actually be 2, 3, 4 nights of playing your game. It's very unlikely that it's going to just be one sitting of actually playing the game. But obviously that can vary. Sometimes a session might be quite short. Sometimes it might be, 6, 7, 8 game nights worth of playtime. It's really up to the Fate Master, and it's also, of course, up to the players, because you might have set up a particular mission or a particular encounter that you're expecting your characters to go on, and they might just go in the opposite direction and do something else. We all know how that is. So it can be a little bit hard to keep on top of that and to make sure that your characters are actually following through on the story that you're playing, but that's why you have to kind of be reactive, and you kind of have to prepare for what you're expecting to happen, and then also account for all those other variables. Now, based on everything I've said so far, that might sound a little bit confusing and maybe a little bit hard to actually implement in the game, but I would encourage you, especially if you're a Fate Master, to actually give this a shot, because I found it to be one of the coolest and most rewarding parts of playing in a traditional campaign. So just for the purposes of demonstration here, let me take an example to kind of give you an idea of how you might design a session around a particular fate step. So let's say you've identified the character who's going to be the sort of spotlight character for the next session, and one of their fate steps says, "And you will deal with the devil." Now, the cool thing about these fate steps is that you can really interpret them pretty poetically and try to come up with some interesting ways to tie that particular language in with the session and whatever the characters are going to encounter. The important thing, though, is to remember that your character should have a choice to make. This should be something that they are active in engaging with. It shouldn't just be something that happens to them or something that's in the background and that they're going to encounter throughout the session. This should be their choice. And that's how it sort of ties into character development. So for this example, maybe your players are going to end up at a casino and there's a person there they're trying to get some information out of. Maybe they don't know where this person is, he's a little bit elusive, but they've identified sort of one of the top bosses at the casino and he's dealing some blackjack. One of the ways they might decide to approach solving this particular encounter and identifying this person would be to go over and start playing some blackjack with this particular person. Now, if he runs a casino in Malifaux, he's probably not a very nice person, so you might interpret that to mean that he is a devil. So you go over, you deal with the devil by playing some hands of blackjack. You kind of make nice with this guy, maybe make him feel like you're the same type of person that he is. And let's be honest, Fated and Through the Breach, they're probably also not great people. And by kind of schmoozing up to this guy, you eventually find out who the person is who has the information you're looking for. Now, of course, your characters might encounter that situation, identify this person, and decide, you know what, he doesn't look like the type of person that we really want to get involved with, and gambling's not really our thing. So instead, we're going to go talk to some of the waitresses and find out if they know who this person is that we're looking for. And if they make that choice, then they have effectively rejected their fate and they've decided to not deal with the devil. One of the most interesting things I found about playing the game was to kind of discuss those choices at the end of the session to find out why your character made the particular choice that they did. And it's a good way to get your characters invested in their character progression and their character's identity and personality, because it makes them think about the choices that they made while they were role-playing and understand why their character may have made that choice as opposed to a different one. Now, on top of all that, it means that at the end of your whole campaign, your players will be able to go back and look at all the fate steps and all the decisions that they made, and it'll kind of be this sort of character arc or this development that their character went through over the course of the particular campaign that you're playing. And the next awesome thing is that once your character has chosen to either embrace or reject their fate, they are going to unlock a fate step when they do their level up at the end of the session, which means they're going to get some extra cool bonuses. This is one of the most mechanically interesting parts of the game, and that, again, is why I think that this whole fate system is super important, because it's important both for your character development, for your session structure, for the writing of the campaign, but also for the rules that your players are going to get to interact with. So if you're not sure how your normal level up works, then reference that video that I did a couple of weeks ago. I will post a link in the description so you can check that out. If you're enjoying this video and you want to support the channel, then there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. The first would be to pick up some merchandise through my merch store. You can grab a t-shirt, a hoodie, a mug, a sticker, all sorts of cool stuff like that. You can also shop using my affiliate links, so if you're going to make any purchases from any of these companies, you can use the links in the description below to make your purchases, and it will go directly to supporting the channel at no extra cost to you. There's also a link for my Ko-fi if you would just like to give me a tip, or my Patreon if you want to support me longer term. I have a bunch of different tiers there, and there are all sorts of benefits available to people, such as early access to videos, ad-free videos, the opportunity to vote in polls about upcoming content, and extra entries into the giveaways that I run occasionally. But if none of that is your cup of tea, no problem at all. Just make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and leave a like on the video. It actually helps a tremendous amount. And if you want to go the extra mile, then consider sharing the video out with some friends who you think might find it interesting. The YouTube algorithm is not kind to small YouTubers, so that helps a whole bunch. Other than that, consider joining the Discord, also linked in the description, where you can come and hang out with me and the rest of the community and talk games. But with that, let's get right back to the video. So once all your characters have gone through the process of doing their normal level ups, then you can kind of dismiss the rest of the players and keep the person who has unlocked their fate step for the session, because they have a little bit extra work to do. Now, I just realized that I've been referring to it as a fate step throughout this whole video, and technically the rules call it a destiny step, but I'm not re-recording all that, so y'all just gonna have to deal with it. It basically means the same thing. I mean, it's not confusing, right? Anyway, the character who has unlocked their destiny step has a choice. They can either take any one of their aspects and increase it by 1, or they can unlock a manifested power. Now, the first choice is the most straightforward one, and it's pretty powerful because it's going to improve one of your core abilities by 1, which is a pretty significant advancement. It's going to mean that a lot of your skill checks get a teeny bit easier. It might actually change some of your derived aspects so that maybe your defense or your willpower will be a little bit higher. And it's also super easy to choose. Your players probably already know where their character's particular weaknesses are, or maybe they want to make them even better at the thing that they're really good at, and they can just tick one of those numbers up and be good with it. This is also the only way you're going to increase your aspects after you've done your character creation process, so it's a pretty good opportunity, but I really think the manifested powers are super cool, so I would encourage you to at least consider that and talk about it with your players before they decide to lock in improving one of their aspects. So you're probably wondering what a manifested power is. And basically this is your character unlocking an ability that you're going to create between the Fate Master and the player that is going to be custom tailored to that particular player. And it's going to be something that is based on something significant that happened in the last session. There's a whole bunch of flexibility, and it really allows you to get super creative and come up with some interesting abilities that are really specific and personal to that particular character. It's super duper flexible. You can kind of do whatever you want, although as a Fate Master, I would say, try to make it balanced at least to an extent. You don't want to make it too crazy and game breaking. But it can be a really fun process of kind of going through and discussing different options that your character might have and the ideas based on what they think was significant about the last session or cool moments that happened that they want to try to represent in the particular ability that they want to unlock. Now, manifested powers are going to come in two different categories, and that is ability manifested powers and spell-like manifested powers. And just like it kind of says in the description, that's basically just a custom ability or a custom spell-ish that you're going to make for the character. An ability is sort of a passive thing that you're going to come up with that your character just has access to, just like something that you might unlock when you level up in a particular pursuit. They're a little bit more straightforward. They're not quite as hard to actually design because you kind of just come up with the idea and implement it, and it's something that your character just always has access to. So an example of an ability like that from the book would be a character who gets injured and they run over to get medical help, and the doctor basically tells them to walk it off. So they decided to get an ability manifested power called Walk It Off, where every time they take a walk action, they heal a point of health. An example that I've actually used was a character who had sort of gone and done their own thing during a combat encounter. They were way off on like the left flank, like escorting an NPC instead of fighting in the main combat encounter. And they got picked on a little bit by the enemies, but everything kind of worked out okay. And me and the player decided that they were going to unlock an ability manifested power, and we called it something like Lone Wolf, where they would actually get positive twists to defense and willpower checks when they were not within a certain range of their allies. Shout out to Cal for that one. Now, the other option would be a spell-like manifested power, and if you know anything about the magic system in Through the Breach, then you know there is quite a lot to it. There are a whole bunch of different magia and immutos that you can add to sort of customize a spell that you're going to cast, and then your magical theory is also going to tweak that a little bit and add some different weird things, and there's a lot of different moving parts to it. Well, a spell like Manifested Power is kind of like that, but on steroids. You're going to custom create your own spell that the character is going to have access to. And it's going to work a little different than a normal spell because you're not going to need a grimoire, but it is still going to be affected by your magical theory, and it's not going to have immutos that you can use with it. It's just going to kind of do one specific thing. So it's very customizable when you create it, but then when you want to use it, it's just going to have the same effect every time. It'll just be pretty straightforward once it's implemented. And the cool thing is that characters who are not necessarily magic users can unlock spell-like manifested powers. Everybody in Malifaux has some magical dealings, even if they're not, sorcerers or mages. So this is a cool way to give a character who is not especially magic-focused a little bit of an extra spicy thing that they can do. Maybe it's a character who's more roleplay focused, they're not really good in combat, and something funny happens in combat, so you can allow them to unlock a particularly good spell, which can be the thing that they do in combat from now on instead of just running and hiding. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's a super combat-focused character, and you give them something that allows them to be a little bit more useful in the role-playing parts. This is probably going to take a little bit more back and forth between the player and the Fate Master as you decide exactly how the spell is going to work, what the effects are going to look like, and make sure that that's something that's reasonably balanced but also represents what the character did and what they want to get out of it, basically. So there's a little bit of a process to go through to actually create the spell-like manifested power, and that is to choose a magia, add whatever immutos you want, decide what the TN and if there's going to be any suit requirement, as well as choosing the aspect and skill that are going to be associated with it. So the example that is given in the book is a character who was thrown in a river and had to kind of swim in some really cold water. So she creates a spell-like manifested power that uses the berry magia, and it combines the ice immuto and the water immuto. And the effect of this particular spell is if they hit the target with it, then they're actually going to disappear for 3 turns, and when they come back, they'll be affected by water and ice. The idea there being that they want to subject their target to the same sort of fate that they had when they fell in the river and had to freeze their butt off. Now, I've actually had a couple of examples of spell-like manifested powers in campaigns that I've played, and I don't remember all of the kind of nitty-gritty of exactly what we use for all of them. I don't have them written down anywhere. But one of the interesting ones that comes to mind is I had a player in a more traditional campaign that I played years and years ago who was trying to save his love interest from a bad guy. And this particular character fought with a shotgun that always did blast damage, so he had this issue where he wanted to target the bad guy who was trying to kidnap the girlfriend, but if he shot the bad guy, he would hit his girlfriend as well. So he ended up in this situation where he was really trying to separate them in the combat encounter so that he could shoot the dude without hurting the girl. And it became this interesting dilemma that he was faced with. So we created a spell like Manifested Power that would basically pull an enemy towards him and then allow him to take a shot with his shotgun at them. It was kind of like a combination of a lure with an ability that allowed him to just get an extra attack out of it. And he wasn't very good at it because he was not a magic-focused character, but the few times that he actually managed to make it work, it was actually very cool. It also sort of effectively extended the range of his shotgun because it's obviously a very close range weapon, but the spell would go a little bit further, so he could pull somebody in using the spell and then get them in range without having to walk over to them. So useful in a couple of different ways. So just to summarize, every session of a game is supposed to be tailored to one particular character and a fate step of theirs. It doesn't have to go in order necessarily, but you do kind of want to spread them out among the different players. So you don't have one character who keeps unlocking destiny steps and everybody else is kind of left behind. Then they're going to make a decision where they either embrace their destiny or they reject their destiny, and then when you do your level up, they are going to get a extra special level up with some cool additional things. The choice that they have to make then is they can either increase an aspect by 1 or they can unlock a manifested power. Manifested powers come in 2 flavors. You have ability manifested powers and spell-like manifested powers, and those roughly correlate to the abilities and spells that you have in the game otherwise, but they're going to be very highly tailored to a particular thing that happened in that session or something that is thematic for that session. And it's going to be something that you're going to work on between the Fate Master and the player, and hopefully try to make something that's pretty well balanced. Now, I hope you've seen through all of this that this is a system that is like super duper important to this game. It's definitely something that takes a little bit of extra work, especially from the Fate Master, but I think it's really, really worth it. It is pretty rewarding both as a Fate Master as well as a player to get to deal with some of these mechanics here. If you're running a campaign and you're having trouble using the Destiny steps or implementing them in a particular way, then definitely join the Discord and let me know, because both myself as well as a bunch of other members of the community are pretty experienced. We will be happy to answer any questions or jump in voice chat and give you some pointers or kind of brainstorm some ideas of ways that you could implement some of the things that you're trying to do in your campaign. If you have any specific questions about the way that any of these mechanics work, then get down in the comments below and let me know. I will definitely be keeping an eye on them, so if you do have questions, I will answer them there as well. With that, I hope that you find this whole system as interesting as I do. I think it could be super duper rewarding, and I also want to hear some of the cool and interesting things that you've had happen in your campaign. So get down there and let me know what are some of the cool manifested powers that you've seen, what are some of the creative ways that you've actually had your characters encounter destiny steps, or what were your favorite things that your characters had to decide whether they wanted to accept or reject. But that's all I got for you for now. Stay tuned for more Through the Breach stuff. I have something really interesting coming up, because I don't know if you know, but there's an expansion coming out very soon for Through the Breach, so keep an eye on this space. With that, I want to say a huge thank you to the Extremely Cool Kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatize, and Devin.